Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Earl.
And I'm Will Garcia.
And together we're the Hoops Guys. And today we're going to continue our 2014-2015 NBA season previews by talking about these guys, the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah. Finally, not terrible last year. Holy improvement, Batman. This team went 21-61 in 2012-13, jumped way up to 43-39 in 2013-14, and guess what they made?
Oh, they made the playoffs.
The playoffs! I mean, to be fair, they lost in the first round to the Miami Heat,
but Big Al had that injury, too, so that didn't help.
But they went from 28th in offensive rating and 30th in defensive rating and first in just downright putridness to being 24th in offensive rating and 5th in defensive rating.
Yes.
Mostly because of head coach Steve Clifford being awesome and new star player Big Al Jefferson.
Yes. As great as them getting back into the playoffs again was... there is a much bigger, more awesome story regarding this team, in my opinion at least, and that's the return of Charlotte's original NBA moniker, logo, and my favorite mascot of all time, Hugo, the Hornet. That's right, people. The buzz is back in Charlotte.
And don't forget the coolest core in the entire NBA.
Oh, yes.
The honeycomb is real.
Yes. I grew up in Oregon in the 90s, so I've been a Blazers fan all of my life.
Watch our Blazers preview.
That wasn't what I was going for, but yes.
Look at all the stuff. Like, there's video evidence of this.
Yes, I have a lot of Blazer swag. But as much as I loved the Blazers growing up, they were always my second favorite NBA team behind the Charlotte Hornets. Muggsy Bogues. He's tied with Scottie Pippen as my absolute, no question, all-time favorite player. Basketball history, all-time favorite. And he's actually a huge reason why I love this game so much. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with a heart condition that basically kind of made me a little shorter than the rest of my classmates and the rest of my peers. I had kind of stunted growth because of it. And Muggsy was always this shining role model to me. Here was a 5'3", 140-pound guy. Let that sink in. 5'3", 140 pounds.
Yeah.
Guy playing in the land of giants known as the NBA. And he wasn't just playing in there off like somebody's bench as a sideshow attraction. He was freaking starting.
Yeah.
And he was dropping dimes and D'ing up like freaking crazy.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of why I love the Hornets so much. On top of it, even with MJ and Scottie dominating the entire decade with those amazing Bulls teams, the coolest team in the NBA in the 90s was always the Charlotte Hornets.
Mm-hmm.
They had super awesome characters in Muggsy, Alonzo Mourning, of course, Grandmama himself, Larry Johnson, and of course, they easily had the best jerseys, bar none, and the best home court design in the entire NBA. And they've brought it back, which is so exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the court being awesome. Offensively, they didn't do too much that was equally awesome on the court, but the one area where they did was that they protected that ball like people protect things that they think need protection.
Like a parent protects their child, I guess?
I don't know.
Something like that.
It depends on your parent, depends on the child.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
anyway, first in turnover percentage. And that low turnover rate helps you out so much defensively because other teams really can't get on the break as much when you're not committing live ball turnovers.
Yep, and defensively is where this team grew by leaps and bounds last year.
That's where the money was at.
We mentioned earlier, they went from dead last in defensive rating in the previous season to 5th in 1 year.
Yeah.
And they did this by focusing on getting back in transition, dropping their bigs on pick and rolls, not playing overly aggressive pick and roll coverages by their bigs, and thus kind of forcing them to have to get back and just kind of avoid that problem. And also just the bare bones, essential core piece of defense. Make your opponents take tough shots.
Yeah.
They finished 9th in effective field goal percentage defensively, which is largely due to them finishing 6th in defensive expected points per shot, which, shout out to Ian Levy and Nylon Calculus, is a measure of the value of your shot selection, or in this case, the shot selection of your opponents.
Yep.
And their 5th place finish in actual points per shot defensively. As they didn't just prevent opponents from getting easy looks, but they also contested the looks that their opponents did take. And the zombie Bobcats were 10th in restricted area true shot attempts defensively and 5th in field goal percentage in that range defensively. On top of it, opponents weren't really able to convert in the non-restricted paint area, where the Hornets placed 2nd in the paint field goal percentage defensively. They also forced the 6th most mid-range shots, which, if you follow analytics at all, is kind of like the of analytics.
Yeah.
the least statistically valuable shot in basketball. And they defended the corners really well. They finished 9th in both corner 3 true shot attempts defensively and corner 3 defensive field goal percentage.
Yeah, and then the big thing that I saw was that they prevented the gimmies. And I think that the gimmies are offensive rebound putbacks and then those free throws. 2nd in free throws per field goal attempts on defense, and they ranked 1st in defensive rebound percentage.
Yeah. Not everything was great for them, though, last year.
No, and the biggest problem was the offense. Needless to say, it was, to make a terrible pun, offensive.
That was a terrible pun, but
I know.
Fair enough.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to see everywhere where they finish in the bottom 10 and see if I can do it in one breath.
Ooh.
24th in offensive rating, 25th in effective field goal percentage, 26th in offensive rebound percentage, 21st in XPPS, 24th in actual points per shot, 23rd, I took a second breath, 23rd in restricted area field goal percentage, 20th in the paint true shot attempts, took the most mid-range shots, we're just 26th in field goal percentage on them, 27th in corner 3 shot attempts, 22nd in field goal percentage for there. 25th in above the break 3 attempts, and 24th in free throw percentage. Couldn't do it. Darn.
There's a reason you couldn't do it. There was a lot.
Yeah.
But
it was basically longer than the Declaration of
attempt.
Independence.
You get an A+ for effort.
Well, thank you.
Yes. There were a few issues defensively as well. They finished 26th in defensive turnover rate. Part of this, though, is systematic, though. They weren't trying to force live ball turnovers, in part because they weren't trying to play the passing lanes and gamble too much, because they were really focused on forcing opponents to take tougher shots. So it was a little more systemic in that case. But they also didn't really defend above the break threes very well. They were 26th in true shot attempts defensively there, and 28th in field goal percentage defensively from above the break. And while they forced a lot of mid-range shots for opponents, their opponents converted them pretty decently, and the Hornets wound up 20th in mid-range defensive field goal percentage.
Yeah, to be fair, when you drop the big man back in pick and rolls like they do, you do give up slightly more open or significantly more open mid-range shots. So I think that 20th and mid-range defensive field goal percentage thing was largely systemic, and it wasn't an effort thing or they didn't contest the shot at all.
That said, you can do the drop back in pick and roll coverage with your bigs and still have them at least get the hand up. Some bigs are really good at that. Some bigs just kind of do the drop back, keep their hands down, maybe to discourage passing lanes, but they don't really get their hand up necessarily to contest the shot. And you don't necessarily have to go out at the guy and try to act like you're going to block the shot. Even just getting your hand up is going to be somewhat of a distraction to the shooter.
Yep. One guy who was not a distraction for this team was Big Al Jefferson. And he wasn't a distraction because he was awesome. He put up the best numbers that he's put up in a long time. And he really helped some of his defensive problems, especially he self-admitted that he didn't really care about defense very much before, but now he's actually a plus on that end of the court, I think. And a lot of that, you got to give credit to both Big Al and Coach Steve Clifford. Al Jefferson is one of the best post scorers in the game, make no mistake about it. As much as he improved on defense, his calling card is on offense, and he can single-handedly, create shots for himself and his teammates on the block. Al put up 22 points and 11 boards last year, respectable efficiency, and he took great care of the basketball. One thing that people who are efficiency snobs sometimes forget, and I'm an efficiency snob, that they sometimes forget about turnovers.
Yep.
And turnovers are not efficient. But Big Al took great care of that ball, tying for the 5th fewest turnovers out of the entire top 40 in points per game. In Big Al, the Hornets have a hell of an offensive threat, and he's decent enough on defense to be a huge plus for this team. Yeah.
Another player that's kind of central for this team, a core member of the roster, is Kemba Walker. Mm-hmm. He's a former NCAA champion and Final Four most outstanding player back with UConn. But he hasn't really been able to translate his winning ways from college to the NBA level so far.
Yeah.
To be fair, part of that, at least in my opinion, is due to the context he's in. Prior to last year, he didn't really play with the type of scoring threat that Al Jefferson provided last year. So defenses were kind of keyed in on him. On top of that, he hasn't really played with a lot of floor spacing shooters that the defenses have to respect from three. So while Kemba is really good at breaking his defender down off the dribble and being able to get past him and thus inciting some sort of chaos for the defense, the lack of shooters and scoring threats so far on the zombie Bobcats, now Hornets, rosters that he's been on, has the effect of kind of packing in those driving lanes a little bit more. And I think that's part of it. I also think it's one of those cases where perhaps the perception of Kemba might be slightly higher than the reality is. And a large part of that might be due to how insanely good his intangibles are.
Yeah.
Like, he's the type of guy whose personality, maturity, and poise align so well with what you want your main guy to be for your franchise that you maybe ascribe a little more value to him than maybe his actual impact on the court is.
Yeah.
All that said, the Hornets believe in Kemba. And they showed it by giving him a 4-year, $48 million extension. I would love to see what Kemba could do in an actual 4-out spread pick-and-roll style offense. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon for the Hornets. But I think it'll be interesting to see how well Kemba can live up to that extension given the lack of shooting around him on the roster currently.
Yep.
And speaking of lack of shooting, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is another core member of this team, former number 2 overall pick. He's one of my favorite active players. Yeah, I love this guy. He's an extremely gifted process defender. And what I mean by process defender is they focus on doing the little things every time consistently that maybe don't equate to results per se, and they don't show up in box scores, but they definitely have an impact on how well your opponent does that game and subsequently over the course of the season. So a large part of that is due to some pretty interesting gifts that he has. He's a very quick on his feet, but very solid 6'7", 233-pound wing. He's got a 7-foot wingspan, and he's also got a really strong defensive basketball IQ and a renowned work ethic. Put all that together, and you can imagine how he could be a really, really pain-in-your-ass perimeter defender for opponents. Like I said, his numbers don't really reflect that all the time. And in fact, last year, there were a couple of games against him that were somewhat high profile that knocked his perception a little bit publicly. LeBron James scored 61 points and Melo scored 62 points against the Bobcats.
Yeah.
Couple caveats. One, he didn't play. He only played 18 minutes, I think, in the LeBron James game and 26 in the Melo game. But if you actually watched his defense in those games, great process defense. He forced them to take lower value, tough looks. They just have offensively is the question, and even more specifically, the question is in relation to shooting.
Yep.
If, and it's a huge if, given how bad it has been so far, but if he can become just a league average shooter from mid-range and three, it'll have a massive impact on this Hornets franchise. He's been working on a shot a lot with all-time great shooter and 50-40-90 club member Mark Price, and you can see the work that he's put into it. I think within the next 2-3 seasons, he could reach that league average shooter from mid-range and three, and then when he does, watch out, Hornets opponents.
Absolutely. I think that if he can get even like a corner three thing going, he could have a very similar impact to Bruce Bowen, minus injuring other players and having a bad reputation.
Yeah.
Speaking of bad reputation, the Hornets brought in Lance Stephenson. Now, to be fair, Lance showed a lot of improvement for the Pacers last year. He kind of was a primary or secondary ball handler most of the time, really improved as a facilitator and as a shot creator, at least it looked like he made major strides as a rebounder, going from 4.8 to 7.3 boards per 36, and as a shooter, going from 33 to 35% from three and 27 to 39% from mid-range. A lot of people thought he was an all-star snub, and if Dragic didn't ball out of his mind, I think that Lance would have been a okay sort of front runner for most improved player. Having said that, with Lance, you also have to deal with the stolen rebounds, the not-so-awesome freestyle raps, video bombing, and ear-blowing, and ridiculous turnovers, flashy passes that sail way out of bounds because he decided to go behind the back with three dudes on him, and then all those, dude, what are you thinking? Contested three-point pull-ups with 18 seconds on the clock. With Lance, just like with everybody else in life, you have to take the good with the bad. Fortunately, there's a lot of good. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of bad, and the bad is infuriating.
Yeah.
One guy who isn't infuriating is Marvin Williams. You know, I think it's pretty cool that finally people are thinking of this guy as something other than, oh, that guy who got drafted before Chris Paul and Darren Williams. Marvin earned his 2-year, $14 million contract because he can stretch the floor as a small ball power forward. At least that's what he did with the Jazz last year. Having said that, I'm not entirely sold on him as a big dude, just because the guy isn't really a rebounder at all. To put it into perspective, if you look at the on-off stats, and I know on-off stats are not an end-all be-all, but considering how much else there is when it comes to rebounding stats, there really isn't too much else I can go by. And they said that opposing teams rebounded the ball 4% better, and the Jazz rebounded the ball 5% worse with Marvin Williams on the floor. That is a 9% swing. And while a lot of this is contextual and systemic, having your starting power forward only grabbing 5 boards per game doesn't really help. Still, Marvin has a really useful skill set, and he'll play nice as a much-needed spot-up option with Lance, Al, and Kemba.
Yeah. Another player that the Hornets are hoping will be a nice spot-up option with those guys.
He won't. Sorry.
Might want to give him a chance first, Will, given the small sample size. Is 9th overall pick Noah Vonleh. Maybe Will's just a little cranky because that 9th pick came to be the Hornets only because of how it fell for the Pistons, and therefore it had to be conveyed to them as part of a prior deal. So the Hornets took Noah Vonleh from Indiana. He's a 6'9.5" power forward, 247 pounds, 7'4" plus wingspan. And he, in college, it was only 1 year, sample size abounds, but he did show capability of crashing the boards, blocking some shots, and stretching the floor from both mid-range and 3. He only took 33 threes in his 1 year in college, but he hit them at a pretty decent rate, which has led some people to think that he could be the type of player that Will and I kind of salivate over the idea of a rim protector who can also space the floor. That said, and I'm definitely directing this at you too, buddy, we'll have to wait a little while and see, because 33 shots from 3 is a ridiculously small sample size. Not to mention the NBA three-point line is further back, and you've got much better defenders closing out on you. But it'll be interesting to see how he adapts those skill sets to the NBA level next to guys like Big Al, Kemba, MKG, Lance, etc. But it's going to take a little while longer before we actually see him on the NBA court because he's out right now with a sports hernia.
Yep. One guy who is a proven stretch big man, and the Hornets are going to desperately miss this guy, Josh McRoberts. This guy had a bit of a career renaissance last year in Charlotte. He really showed himself to be an elite facilitator, a great shooter, especially for a big man, and I think he was vital to this team's success last year. Yeah. Now, to be fair, his rebounding, both in percentages and per game, went down a little bit in Charlotte, but I think this is systemic just because of the way that this team focuses mostly on MKG crashing the offensive glass, and everyone else kind of gets back.
Yep, exactly.
So with all these new faces, the Hornets brought in 12 more possessions than they lost in free agency. And I think that a couple of guys are going to be taking slightly smaller roles because of this. Kemba is starting to see a little bit of a pinch. Not significant, but it's a little bit. Bismack Biyombo isn't really even getting minutes anymore. That's going to be a few. Big Al isn't feeling much of it, and Lance isn't feeling too much of it. So there's a couple...
Gerald Henderson
is feeling it a lot.
Yes.
So there are a couple of guys who are going to have to take some smaller roles, but I think that for the big players, it's going to be about the same.
Yep. Another thing we kind of look at on our previews is a thing called rest differential, which is basically just comparing a team against their opponents over the course of the season in how many road back-to-backs, 3 games in 4 nights, and 4 games in 5 nights they play. The Hornets have a positive 11 rest differential, which just means over the course of the season they play 11 less of those energy rest sapping games. Mm-hmm. So that should be beneficial for them in terms of being a little more consistent production-wise from night to night over the course of the season compared to opponents.
Yep. So another thing we like to do is called 5 questions. I ask Josh some questions, he asks me some questions, and they're about things we otherwise wouldn't have gotten to. I have the first question, and it's with one of the players that I think you like pretty much, Bismack Biyombo. He's only played 3 minutes this season. What is this team going to do for rim protection?
Yeah, Bismack's really the best option for them rim protection-wise. But when you factor in the minutes for Big Al and you're trying to incorporate Marvin Williams, get Cody Zeller more minutes at the 4, and eventually Vonleh is going to get minutes at the 4, his opportunities have really kind of shrunk. That said, he's a very, very capable rim protector. I mean, if you look at another shout-out to Nylon Calculus and Ian Levy, they have this great thing on rim protection based off the Sports View stats there called SOPA per 36, which in other terms is just points saved through your rim protection over per 36 minutes where it's been adjusted according to the average of your position. And in that metric, Bismack Biyombo was 3rd in the entire NBA.
Yep.
So the guy can protect the rim. It's just he can't really do a whole lot else. He's not a particularly strong rebounder, and offensively outside of, right by the rim type finishes, he doesn't give you much. And I think for those reasons, that's why he's not seeing much court time when you factor in that, their starting wing, who I love, MKG, also isn't really going to contribute much outside of by the rim. Yeah. So
I get it.
Yeah. We talked about it briefly before, but was Kemba Walker's 4-year, $48 million deal a steal, okay, or an overpay?
I think it was a bit of an overpay, but I understand why they did it. Charlotte, as cool of a team as it is, as cool as the jerseys and the courts and the nostalgia and the mascot are, as I think the fans are pretty cool too, and I have no doubts it's an awesome city, but it isn't really a big free agent market. So sometimes if you want a guy, you kind of have to cough up a little bit of dinero. And I think it's kind of what happened with Kemba Walker. I'm not entirely sold on him being a good fit for this roster, just because even if he's driving to the lane and penetrating and doing what he needs to do, a lot of that relies on driving kick. And who's he going to throw it out to? MKG? It just doesn't really... Gerald Henderson? It just doesn't really add up with this roster. I think that he can be a good player, but he's struggled as a finisher. 52% from the restricted area isn't very awesome. He struggled as a three-point shooter. 33% from 3, not very good. He isn't like the best facilitator. He struggles in some areas on defense. There are a lot of things that he doesn't do well, and they get kind of compounded by this roster. So I think, like what you mentioned, if they put him in a 4-out offense, it could be really cool, but on this roster, I'm just not a fan.
Yeah, I concur.
So with the Hornets having signed Marvin Williams this offseason and having drafted Cody Zeller and Noah Vonleh in consecutive drafts, what is this team doing at the 4?
I think it's kind of obvious what they're trying to do at the 4 is introduce an element of spacing in that starting lineup.
And yes, it's needed.
Yes. I think what they're trying to do is they know they have Big Al Jefferson in the post. They know they have Kemba, who can break down the defense off the dribble. They need floor spacing, and they're already committed to MKG at that wing position, and rightfully so due to his wing defense. Mm-hmm. So they have to implement some sort of spacing in that lineup somewhere, and it makes sense that they're going to try to do it at the power forward position. That's why they signed Marvin Williams. That's why they picked Cody Zeller and Noah Vonleh, both guys. Zeller, not so much, didn't really show it in college too much, but part of that was role. But the story on him was that in high school he was a really good shooter for a big, and in draft workouts he shot it really well from mid-range and approaching 3. And Vonleh, like we mentioned earlier, very small sample size, but he did hit the threes that he did take at a pretty decent rate in college. So I think they're trying to identify players who can space from the 4 and more specifically with the Zeller and Von Lay picks, guys who can do that while also being able to get out in the fast break with Kemba, MKG, and others.
Yep.
Speaking of others, with the addition of Lance Stephenson and hopefully more minutes for MKG due to a less terrible shot, will the Hornets trade Gerald Henderson, who's kind of been languishing on the bench?
I'm gonna flip this one back around. What sort of team would want Gerald Henderson?
Clippers, a team that needs a solid defender at the wing who can also hit catch and shoot opportunities and get out in transition.
Yeah, that could be a decent fit. I think that anytime you have a player, and it might even be a chemistry and sort of locker room thing, anytime you have a player who's used to being a major contributor who suddenly isn't contributing, you kind of create a sense of expectations. And you see this all the time in literally any role or any organization, not even just sports. People get accustomed to having mattering a certain amount, I guess is what how's the best way to put it. And you kind of build people up in the process of doing that. And then when you don't give them that opportunity, it can kind of cause some friction. So I wouldn't be surprised if because of that, Gerald Henderson isn't feeling super happy, or even if a guy like Bismack isn't feeling super ecstatic. And because both of those guys have shown that they have skill sets that they can contribute with, I wouldn't be surprised if either one of those guys wound up being traded, because what's the point of having a useful player who's might be getting disgruntled on your bench?
Yeah.
So this is kind of a big one, but with Al, Kemba, and Lance, they're all highly talented, but they also aren't the most efficient core to build around in terms of true shooting percentage and typical notions of scoring efficiency. Those three players have finished between 50 and 53% true shooting for their careers. A large part of this is because they rely on what I'd call individualist offense, which are things like pick and rolls, ISOs, post-ups. So can you build a successful system around this group of players and these sorts of play types in 2014?
You can, but you have to have knockdown, lights-out shooters around them that the defenses have to respect.
Yep.
And I've discussed this with Will before, but it's not so much reality that matters, but perception.
Yep.
So you could be a really killer catch and shoot threat, but if teams don't really think of you as a really deadly catch and shoot guy, it's not going to be as impactful as somebody that they do think that of. So if they can get a couple of guys in the lineup with those three aforementioned players, it could be successful offensively. But given they don't have those guys right now, you're going to struggle somewhat offensively.
Yep. Every team could use Kyle Korver, but this team could really use Kyle Korver.
Yes.
One thing that we hope our team previews could use is the 20-50-80 predictions that we like to do.
Yes.
Where we say things that are 20%, 50%, and 80% likely that we think could occur during the course of this season. I'm going to be selfish and start off. I think that's 20% likely that Gary Neal gets at least one Sixth Man of the Year vote. Josh really disagrees with me on this.
I do, but for sake of brevity, I'm
it.
not going to get into it too much other than to say, fair enough, your prediction.
Okay, so I think that's 50% likely that Lance makes the All-Star team. His rebound numbers are going to be super inflated because that's kind of how he plays. More on that later. He scores well enough, and he gets enough assists, and he can generate steals, and he might get something that looks like a block a game. And with all that put together, he kind of, box score-wise, is a really versatile guy. Box score-wise.
Yeah.
And then I think it's 80% likely that Al Jefferson has a career low year in rebounds per 36 and fails to average 9 boards per game for the first time since 2005-2006. And that is not a diss on Al Jefferson.
Nope, that is the curse of Lance.
Yes, it is. He robs his big dudes of boards. He does. Like, let's put it this way. So in terms of on-off, there was literally 0% difference for the Pacers last year in rebounding on both offense and defense when Lance was in and out of the game. And that might not sound like it's very damning, but wait a second. This guy led the league for guards in rebounding. You would think that would contribute to them being better at rebounding.
This kind of flows right into my 20% prediction, which is I think it's 20% likely that Lance's rebound thievery is going to cause some discomfort in the locker room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's not that, it'll be something else he does.
Yeah, probably. I think it's 50% likely that once again they're going to see an increase in wins this season. That said, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the kind of increase in wins from the previous season to this last one, but I think that they improved their record this year. I think it's 80% likely that MKG posts a career year in terms of true shooting percentage. And so far, small sample size, but so far he is got a huge increase career-wise in true shooting percentage through these games to this point. And I would expect it to still regress to the mean, but still be better than his previous years. And I know I already did my 20-50-80, but I think it's 100% likely that I will buy a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist new Charlotte Hornets jersey.
Right on. So a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist Charlotte Hornets jersey would definitely be killer, but is this team going to be killer?
Barring a significant injury to Big Al, I think they're a definite playoff team in the East this year. I don't think they get very far in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. They probably won't get, a home court advantage in the first round or anything, but they will be a definite playoff team in the East. So I don't think they'll be fighting for the 8th seed. I think they'll be in their 6th seed or something.
Yeah, that's actually right where I think they're at. I think they're about a top 6 team. Which top 6 in the East means you're about league average, but considering how terrible the Bobcats were for most of their existence, I think it's a refreshing breath of fresh air. So if you thought that this video was a breath of fresh air, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't think that, give it a thumbs down. Tell us why in the comment section. And if you did like it, consider both hitting the share button and putting it on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, Carrier Pigeon, Twitter, whatever. Also, consider hitting the subscribe button, which will notify you of all of our future videos. Thank you so much for watching.
Take care, everyone.